Hello, I'm Tommy Walsh and welcome to our live show. Today we're talking about preparing your property for the winter, whether it's getting ready for extreme weather conditions or just the fact that your property could be left uninhabited for weeks. We have all manner of helpful hints and tips on offer, and joining me today to discuss them is Eddie Hooker from Total Landlord Insurance and property guru Marie Paris. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Coming up on the show today, as winter comes, Eddie has seen every insurance claim under the sun, so he will be letting us know what to watch out for. We'll take a tour of the danger spots of the average property, and we'll talk electrical safety tips in our Ask the Experts feature. And of course, we'll discuss all manner of topics affecting landlords in our Tweaks of the Week section. If you do have any questions for our panel on any of the topics mentioned, please send them in using the box on your screen, or if you are tweeting during the show, please use the hashtag LetYourPropertyTV and we'll give you a mention. Right now, Eddie, you must have seen all sorts of problems over the years as a CEO of an insurance company. What are the most common problems and what can we do to prevent us having to suffer from those problems?
Well, obviously in the winter periods, it's the cold snap, and we are facing probably the worst winter we've had in this country for many a year. So it's things like burst pipes, which and water
I remember
damage.
The very first one
Yeah.
back in 1963. That was the worst winter we had for 100 years. And the damage that happened then was devastating. It actually ruined my father's business. That's one of the reasons why I remember it.
I think people look at damage, but it's not just the damage, it's the financial consequence. If you're a landlord, for example, you've had a major water problem, then that property could be uninhabitable for a period of time, which means under the terms of your tenancy agreement, you've got obligations to rehouse that tenant.
Well, that's something I didn't know, and I've been a landlord for about 25 years now. I didn't know that we had a duty of care if there was a sort of a problem like that. That you'd have to rehouse the tenants.
Well, very much so. You're in a contract between the landlord and the tenant, and you're letting your property in return for a fair rent to that tenant. And if that property is not fit for purpose, and you've seen all the pictures on the TV over the last few weeks with the flooding we've had, then if that property can't be lived in, and it needs to be dried out or it needs to be repaired, then that tenant's got to be somewhere. So yes, of course, you'll probably be insured for that, but it's the
cost
aggravation.
will be covered by the insurance company.
More than likely. If you have a proper landlord policy, then you would have what's called alternative accommodation insurance, so that pays you for rehousing that tenant. But
so it's crucial that you get the right insurance policy.
Exactly, but in this current financial climate, finding properties, especially over the Christmas period, is extremely difficult. So it's about preventing the problem rather than actually looking at the cure, which is the insurance or the repair. So it's actually preparing your property,
Absolutely.
I think, before. So it's like doing an MOT on your property, like
Prevention
you would do.
is better than cure.
100%.
Yeah, so it's like doing not what you would do on your car.
Exactly.
Do the same thing.
Yeah. So look at the guttering, make sure that there's no backup of debris or leaf fall from the autumn, making sure that the property pipes are lagged, making sure that there's a jacket on the cylinder.
Getting your boiler serviced.
Exactly,
isn't it?
making sure that
Well,
the boiler.
well, it's a good dose of common sense. That's what we're talking about, really. And ironically, most of the problems that occur in the winter is water leakage, a burst pipe, say, in the loft. And ironically enough, most of the pipes that service the house happen to run through the loft to create the gravity feed that we need to put some pressure in the taps in the bathroom and for the loo.
Yes.
So, and we have another ironic problem as well, because we've made our houses so well insulated, the roof space, so that it contains the heat in the actual living areas. We've created this extra cold void area between the ceilings and the slates and tiles. So the roof space, the loft space itself, is very, very cold, which is where all the pipes and the tanks are. So if you apply a good dose of common sense, make sure that all the pipes up there are lagged, which is easy now with this sort of insulation, which comes as a foam insulation pre-split. So you just pop that round the pipe and make sure that all the tanks are lagged with the jackets. and therefore you prevent the problem in the first place.
I mean, I think another thing which is important is that, especially from landlords' point of view, is that they probably know where the stopcock is in the property.
Or at least they should know.
Or they should know. Does the tenant? So,
well, that's crucial.
You know,
and this applies to all homeowners, whether you're a tenant or whether you're just a freeholder.
Of course, because I mean, part of your checking for a tenant in the first place, I think that should be a standard thing that you point out, so that a tenant should always know.
Absolutely, that's what people should be looking for. But if you are a very professional and efficient landlord, then what I would suggest you do, that you print this up and laminate it, and put it somewhere where whoever's renting your property, all the people, it shouldn't be just one person who knows where this is. So all the people in the property knows where it is and what to do at certain times of the year. And also one of the tips is to make sure that you check that it works. Now that should be the landlord's responsibility, because quite often they seize up, and then when you need to turn them off, you can't. So just turn it off, and then you can check that by turning on the cold water tap in the sink, and as long as there's no water coming, you know that's working.
Again, when landlords go around and they do their interim inspections, that's something that they can check. Put it in part of their procedures. Yeah.
I mean, I'd also say, what would you want for Christmas? Well, if I was a tenant, I'd want a phone call from my landlord. And if I was a landlord, I'd want to ring my tenant and find out, are they around over Christmas?
Whose responsibility is it, say with outside gutters and downpipes? Would it be the tenant or would it be the landlord's responsibility?
It's the landlord's responsibility.
What, to keep them clear?
To make sure that all the guttering is cleared. However, you know, communicate with your tenants, because your tenants are the people that are actually living in the property. There, so they'll actually see if, you know, the guttering does need clearing. And again, a good tip, when you've got your window cleaner going round to do the property, ensure that he can sort of clean that for you on a periodic basis. But, you know, as you talk about Christmas and what you'd wish for as a landlord, a pair of binoculars is obviously a good thing. You know, you can see the flashing on the roof, and
I would suggest that either landlords or tenants should actually climb ladders to check these things themselves.
Not suggesting that they do, but you need to know
should be done professionally.
That's
a tax deductible cost as well for landlords.
Of course.
Because anything over one story, I would always say get professionals in to do. And likewise with the boiler, would you suggest that you have that annually serviced, or?
Without a hesitation. I mean, you need to make sure that you've got your CP12, which is your gas safe certificate. And obviously, if there are any problems, it will pick that up. But it's something that needs to be done by law in any rented accommodation in the UK, to just make sure that you have that boiler annually tested.
So really it's part of the, if you like, the ongoing MOT service that you do with your property. Same as a car, only your property is a lot more expensive to buy. So you must make sure you look after it properly.
The average claim, Tommy, the average claim we're seeing over the last few years with water damage, the burst pipe damage, let's call it that, is anywhere between £3,000 to £5,000. That's the average, and we've seen claims coming in at £50,000, £60,000, £70,000. And especially over the Christmas period, and where tradesmen are difficult probably to come by.
Well, the huge cost, the increasing costs are eventually going to be borne by all of us.
By all policyholders, because the prices go up, the premiums go up.
And so we all suffer. So it makes, well, practical and common sense to be more astute at prevention.
Yeah. This is a
simple
big
way
investment
to keep the cost down for everyone.
Exactly. Your property is probably your biggest investment, and you need to look after it. And just because you're letting it out to someone doesn't mean that responsibility passes automatically to the tenant. You have a responsibility to look after that property for your own sake as much as your tenant. So
we mustn't also ignore the fact that whilst people live in it, whether they be tenants or freeholders or whatever, you want to try and make that experience as warm and welcoming as possible. So it means that you must make sure that your windows are properly draft proof, good locks on them, make sure that they're double glazed if you can. But a great tip, if they're not double glazed, because it's an expensive thing to do, and if you live in a period property, you can't always change the windows for double glazing. But people forget, if in the summer you have a lovely print curtains, have a second set that you apply in the winter, really heavy duty curtains that you can put over the window, and that will keep the heat in and keep the cold out.
And can I mention also, which I think is very salient at this time, is what's called the Green Deal, which is a government-backed initiative where there's no excuse now for landlords. They can actually get insulation for their property for next to nothing. So that's something that's coming in now and will be pushing more into January, won't it? When they're pushing,
on a question of insulation, we've got a question from Victoria, and it says, "Hi all, I have a flat in London with floorboards throughout." Now this is a right common problem. However, the gaps in between are quite large, and in winter I can feel cold air blowing through. Any tips on what I can do? I don't want to relay the whole floor, thank you. Now this is a serious issue that I come up against all the time. And I'll have first crack at this if you don't mind.
No.
Please do.
When you have floorboards, there is a problem. On the ground floor in a period property, they're a suspended floor. So you have a substructure underneath, and you have air vents that blow through to keep that void area clear of all sorts of problems, fungus, dry rot and everything. Now, it's very fashionable for people to take up carpets or floor covering, sand the floors, lacquer them, and they look really nice, which is great in the summer. But what people don't realise quite often is that wind blowing through, that clear wind, air blowing through underneath, causes real problems in the winter. If it's a windy day, it actually blows dust up all over your polished surfaces, and it's freezing. You can't watch because it just blows cold air up. So some people actually block up the air vents, and that creates another problem because you're going to have all things
condensation and stuff.
So there's a couple of simple ways to do it. You either have to rip the floor up and redo it, or else you can have sections cut, if you're a good DIYer, from an old board somewhere upstairs that matches the timber you've got, and then you cut them into wedges and you glue them and tap them into the gaps. But constantly timber, because it shrinks and expands, you're going to have an issue there. The real way to deal with it, if you want to keep that old looking floor, is to take up the floor and take the skirting boards off, and then on the floor joist you put some battens, put some insulation, then the polystyrene, blown polyurethane insulation in there, and then put the floor back down. So therefore you still got a suspended floor, but you create that warmth underneath the insulation, and then you don't have that problem anymore. But then if you're going to go to all that trouble, you might as well throw out them old floorboards and put a nice piece of engineered oak, tongued and grooved, and that way you don't have to put underfloor heating. That will make that floor so warm and eradicate the problem, and you've transformed the building without having the issues of the drafts. But on the first floor, because there are no air vents between, on the upper floors to bring airflow through, those floors you can easily sand and polish or wax without having the issue of a draft. The draft problem is only on the ground floor.
Brilliant tip, Tommy.
Just make sure if you're listening as a tenant, though, you ask your landlord's permission before you go.
Oh yeah, if you're a tenant, you can't do any of that. But we've got a question from Henry. Have you got any tips on how I can stop getting that condensation mould growing on window ledges? Thank you very much, guys.
Well, look, one of the things I would say is that tenants need to be aware of their responsibility, because condensation is caused how you live in a property.
Dead right.
So, when tenants are airing their dried laundry to be dried, should I say, on radiators, that doesn't help. Blocking up air vents in the bathroom. I've just had a tenant who's been doing that for the last 3 months. That's not great either. When you're cooking, you want to make sure that you're cooking and the kitchen door is closed if you've got a separate kitchen area. And there are many
extractor on, of course.
Absolutely, and there are many other tips. Now, a landlord needs to know these in order to pass it on, because education you can only pass on. And they're basic things, but it is the basic things, Tommy, that when we don't do them, they end up in bigger problems, massive problems. And as you said, the insurance then kicks in, your premium goes up, and if premiums are going up for landlords, what do you think is going to be the consequence? The tenant's rent is going to go up because it is a business.
Everything has a knock-on effect.
Absolutely. I just think that perhaps as car owners, we know automatically we've got to MOT our cars. With our homes, we don't actually think that way. And I think we have to change the way that we think, so that at least once a year, a landlord will go out to their property before the winter months set in and literally do a winterproof exercise of what actually needs to be done.
Definitely.
And, you know, when you get those things into perspective and you put them as part of your procedures and make sure that tenants understand what they can assist with and what some of their responsibilities are, then it's
it seems to me it's common sense, a proper programme of how you're going to manage the property and communication with the tenants. I think that's the ingredient for a successful let, and whether you're just an ordinary resident or whether you're a landlord. I think what we do now is we'll actually go to Ask the Experts and we'll see what they're tweeting us.
The main electrical problems, hazards in the home during the sort of festive winter period is the increased use of electric heaters, and that can lead to extra loads being put on the property. It could also lead to clothing being put on top of heaters, which to dry things in the winter when there's no outside drying. So it can lead to fires from heavy use of equipment. Obviously, coming into winter, you've got the electric lights for the Christmas decorations, and there's been a high increase in the use of electrical decorations within the home and externally. In the gardens, you've got the fancy reindeer, the blow-up Santas. If the electrics aren't properly installed, it could lead to increased shock risk as well, especially outside in the garden, where you don't normally get a lot of electrics. And if people haven't installed the correct circuits, sockets, protective equipment, it can lead to shock to themselves and to anyone visiting the property. The biggest thing with electrical appliances is, if you have existing ones, is making sure there's no damage to them. If they've been put away in the attic since the last Christmas, you've got to make sure the lights are fully working, there's no damage to the cable or the sockets. If you're going to be buying new equipment, you have to make sure it is properly marked. There's a lot of, especially during these busy periods, there is a lot of counterfeit electrical goods come on the market for decorations, and when you come down to presents, things like that. There's quite a lot of counterfeit and dodgy equipment. During the festive if people are going away from home, they have to take particular care with appliances. Most of the appliances are left on the standby mode, but if you're away, that power is still on and can lead to potential fires if there is a problem in the property. So it's better switching the sockets off, unplugging your appliances, apart from the essentials like the fridges, and make sure they're okay. And if anyone is leaving any radios, lights on for deterring burglars, etc., they've got to make sure they're in perfect working order before they start, and have the timers, if they're going to use those, to be working correctly and set correctly. Online, there's a lot of sites to get details about electric safety. They go to the Electric Safe site, they go to the NAPIT site, they can go to Train Standards, they can go to Citizens Advice Bureau, and they'll give contacts and details of what people should be carrying out at this time of year.
Some very good tips there, Eddie. Do you see many claims as a result of poorly fitted electrical installations or poor appliances?
We see claims from every angle. Fire is probably the worst type of claim you could have, and it is down to generally old wiring, overload on the circuit, which I think was spoken in the clip. And again, people not really taking care with the property. And
surely there's a legal certification requirement for electrical installations.
I don't think there is, Marie.
No, there's nothing written in the statutes at the moment that a landlord needs to have an electrical safety certificate, unlike a gas safe certificate. However,
I was unaware. I thought you had to have that. We have that as a matter of course.
Yeah, it's good practice, and I think that most landlords most definitely make sure that they do it, because for the cost that it is, you can't moan about that, because it could be saving a life.
But it's duty of care. It's duty of care. You are letting your property to a consumer. And remember,
it's more to me of a moral issue. I think you're using your property to hopefully make a profit, and you have to make sure that your tenants are properly catered for in a safe environment.
Yes.
Now, one of the problems that I know occurs is that obviously at this time of year, festive season, people want to put up Christmas trees and they want to plug in all sorts of decorations and everything. There is a potential for overloading the system, or if it's not great electrically, the installation, you're putting pressure on it. Now, I've always said to people, you know, what you can do, if at that time of year you want to put lots of plugs into a double socket, you may create a surcharge or an overload. So to me, it's quite simple. Just go along and get yourself a simple extension lead like this, and it's got plenty of sockets, more sockets in there than anything you could possibly need around a Christmas tree, even if you've got 5 different sets of lights on it.
Yes.
But the good thing about this, it shows you the power that's on, and it shows you if there's a surge, and it will automatically cut out. So therefore, there's less risk of you electrocuting yourself, and of course, very little risk of electrical fire. But if you haven't got that, what I say to people, at least get yourself one of these, you know. So this is an RCD, a residual circuit device. And what you do, you plug that into the socket, and then if you've got an ordinary extension lead, plug that into there, set it, and at least then you know you're safe with all these sockets. It's about reducing the potential risk to yourselves
and Tommy,
to your family.
Can I just say that, I mean, having the proper type of adapter, a surge adapter, is so important, as opposed to going into these cheaper stores where you can get a cheap adapter. You don't know, absolutely. I didn't really want to mention the pound word, but you don't know where the adapter comes from.
Or whether it's got a BS standard.
Absolutely, and you're using it. So to invest
and
in
this is
something
for your,
like that,
you might have your kids there, you know. So
can I ask you a question, Tommy? Timer switches, because if you're going away, there's obviously a lot of people be worried about the burglary element. You know, at the end of the day, a tenant is still, it's their home, and burglaries are going up, as we know, and especially in the winter months as the nights draw in. And a lot of people are now moving down to the timer switch. Again, does the timer switch can fit into those?
Yeah, you
and
could.
Are they on all the time, or is the timer switch?
The timer switch has a mechanism within inside. Once you set the timing, it will automatically click on, and then it will click out. But if you're worried about your installation, or you feel slightly insecure, put it into an RCD. Most electrical installations now have a built-in RCD system in their consumer unit. But and as landlords are upgrading their properties and they're complying with good practice, they normally put a new installation which includes RCDs built in, so that negates the need for these.
Right.
But if your property, and you should ask your landlord, you know, what the quality of the installation, how old it is, and then you can determine whether it's got RCDs, or ask him, and then you'll know whether you're covered by the safety aspect or not. Right. And if you're not, then of course make sure you go and acquire some of these. Or even get your landlord to supply them, and at least then you can feel safe. The most important thing is to make sure you feel safe within your property, and you do whatever you can within your power to make sure that happens. And any responsible landlord will make sure that he'll try to accommodate you, because at the end of the day, for a landlord, a happy tenant is what you want, because then you'll make sure you get your money.
Well, it's no hassle factor then, is it? Or less hassle? You can't help it, act of God, but
Right, well now it's time for our tweets of the week. Yes, the tweets this week have been all about squatting. Now, I have a strange opinion about squatting, and I'll just run through it with you to see if you agree. For me, as a builder, the worst thing you can do with a property is to leave it completely empty, because it will deteriorate very quickly, you know, if it's not being lived in. Now, obviously, I understand that for people who have property and they're away and they come back and it's been broken into and it's squatted on, there are serious problems and issues, and quite rightly so. And legislation's been brought in to try and deal with that. But I think, in a way, it might be a sledgehammer to crack a nut, to be quite honest, because I think quite often in certain circumstances, if you're a landlord with, you know, lots of property, that property might be up for redevelopment, and you are awaiting permission or funding to go into place to redevelop it for a refurb or a complete redesign of it. Now, I think it could be in your favour to actually have an agreement with a set of squatters for a certain period of time, that they will actually become a free security system for your property. They could stay in your property, make sure it was looked after, that nobody ripped out all the plumbing, so with flooding, because you know what it's like with empty homes.
I totally disagree, Tommy.
You disagree?
Yeah, I totally disagree.
And your opinion?
Do you know, look, we're landlords, we're not providers of the state. And I know that there are many people that are homeless for no reason of their own, but there are also equally enough squatters that can go out there and work and pay rent like everybody else. I don't actually see why us as landlords should be able to assist in that. I know, for one, I definitely would be out on something like that. I don't know about yourself.
No, well,
if I could
take
have
it from a different angle, though.
I'd rather put a friend in there.
Same thing.
All. Do you know?
It's the same thing. It's an accommodation.
Squatters go out with intention of not paying somebody's rent, and I'm totally against anybody who does
Coming
that.
in from a different angle then, okay. Would you be in favour then of paying for a security company to exist in your very expensive property while you waited for a year for it to be redeveloped? Or would you rather come to an accommodation with a person or a group of people who would assure you, and you could check that that property was kept in good condition, and that would vacate the property when you come and need to redevelop, when you need to get it back? Now, that to me makes economic sense, rather than paying a security firm to deal with it.
In theory, saying it like that, I think I know what most people would go for, but is the law really going to be on the landlord side when you want the people to come out? And that's the thing. And how can
It's
we
a relationship between the two.
ensure that the property is going to be in the condition that you gave it to them in? There isn't that, because there isn't that now in the whole tenant and landlord law. On the face of it, I would just say, but I understand where you're coming from. But
I'm talking about a property that's going to be redeveloped. So it doesn't have to come back in pristine condition, but they just have to keep it secure, and whatever, as long as they don't trash the place, they keep it secure. It's an arrangement you can, when you go back to inspect it and you see there's a problem, then get rid of them, get them ejected.
But they don't work, do they, apparently? So how are they going to pay for it, and then how are you going to enforce it?
I'm not saying they have to pay.
A nil rent agreement, is that possible? I mean,
Never ever done one.
Yeah, so in other words, that you issue a contract, but for no financial, which is probably no different than what you're saying.
You would not want squatters to be on an AST, because we all know what the law is about when you want to try and get tenants out in the first place.
I'm talking about an accommodation. I'm talking about accommodation.
Maybe they should employ more planners and move the system on a bit quicker.
Yeah, but that's still not addressing a moral issue that we could address at the same time by actually coming to an accommodation with certain people, and then once you move them out of that property, move them into another one of your properties, which is awaiting redevelopment. And they would secure that and look after that. So it's a way for them to get cheap accommodation or free accommodation. They would pay the bills, but you get free security.
We're moving into another chapter, and it's absolutely great. But maybe the government could give us a tax break, couldn't they? Could give landlords a tax break. Let's get more properties, and we'd gladly give them to people who genuinely need them for low rent. At the moment, it's our living, and we have to make a living.
Well, at least you're going to consider it now, slightly. we occupied. But that's what the debate's about. But I think we should move on to some more questions now. That we've got a question from Naomi Dawson. I'm worried about my property being broken into while my tenants are away for a couple of weeks over the Christmas period. If I bought some of these timer lights and offered to pay a contribution for the electricity bill, but do you think I can insist that they are left on while they are away? That'd be one for you. I suppose in a way it's securing the property, isn't it?
The question is, can she insist if the timer lights are left on? No, she doesn't have a legal right to insist, but I'm sure that if she communicates with the tenant, she's got a very legitimate concern as to why she's doing that. I don't see why there would be a problem with that. Obviously, tenants need to make sure that they've got their own contents insurance, which is a must.
But on that point, Marie, we spoke about this before the show, Tommy, in terms of keeping the central heating on, can you insist that the tenant, during a period where they're out of the property, maybe with family,
they have a duty of care as well, though, Eddie, don't they?
Can you not insist?
The same thing applies Well, it's simple. Again, it's coming to an accommodation with your tenants. You say it's going to be in your favour, obviously, as a landlord, that your property is in good condition and secure. So then give them a contribution.
I think the danger is that a landlord cannot insist, but it is good practice, obviously, to have your heating on if you're going to be away for a long period of time.
No, you get into a different. It's difficult.
Enforce that? How do you
an
enforce
accommodation
it at the end
needs
of the
to
day
come.
if they don't have it?
Communication between two parties, and then an accommodation found, and then there's a solution to the problem.
Absolutely.
Because it's going to be in their favour. You don't want the place burgled, all this stuff going away while they're away, so the lights on, and you don't want to flood or it to be freezing cold. So it's a great accommodation.
Do you know what the landlord could also do is sort of request with the tenants if he or she will be able to go down and sort of just look in the property whilst they're away.
It depends. If they're abroad, it's going to be very difficult.
It all depends on the logistics and how near they are, if it's feasible. And
right, let's have another question. Now, we've got one from Helen here. Good morning. I keep trying to arrange for someone to get over to my property and service the boiler, but my tenants keep saying it's not convenient. How can I impress upon them that it's really important at this time of year, and where do I stand legally?
Right. CP12 is gas safe certificate is something that she needs to do. Now, from a tenant point of view, they don't need to give you access, but she needs to start putting something down on paper. She hasn't stated how many attempts that she's had, but
she has to do that and put in a written request.
She needs to be able to.
If they're not going to be there,
so.
She has legal right for entry to make sure that the gas can be made safe and that the boiler's functioning properly.
She doesn't have that legal entry, but I think really the point that I'm trying to stress over is that she needs to put that importance over to her tenant, that it's something that needs to be done by law, and it's about her trying to make sure that they're kept safe. I think there must be some reasons behind why the tenant may well be refusing that. Most tenants don't refuse that, and it's probably a different thing.
I'm going to say you're such a cynic, you know.
Don't class me as a cynic. I absolutely have brilliant tenants, and most of them think I'm okay. I'm not going to say brilliant, but it's about having procedures, and that's really what I'm about. You have procedures in place, you very rarely get caught out.
I think it's communication. Communication is absolutely key.
And accommodation as well.
And accommodation.
Communication and accommodation.
And being accommodating.
What we're all about,
Exactly.
Well, I think that's all we can have today. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Eddie, and you, Marie. Thank you. Well, we've run out of time. And my thanks to Eddie and Marie for joining us. For more information and advice for landlords, please go to totallandlordinsurance.co.uk/resources or check out the Total Landlord Facebook page. So that's it for now. Goodbye.